Under the blistering sun of a forgotten frontier where a man was worth less than a horse, a young girl stood bound, sold like damaged goods. The crowd laughed and shouted, and the air was thick with the stench of blood, sweat, and humiliation, a living nightmare in broad daylight. No one spoke. No one stepped in. Everyone turned away, until I saw that tattoo. There it was on her shoulder, a sacred mark that had once saved my life. No one else noticed, but I did. That girl was the daughter of the man who pulled me out of death. Me, Jace Morrow. I'm no hero, no saint, but I couldn't let her be swallowed up by this rotten world. When the auctioneer's hammer dropped opening bid $5, I shouted, "Stop, I'll buy her." But I didn't buy a body. I repaid a blood debt. I reclaimed my soul. We left that slave market in silence. The girl Ainara didn't say a word, but her eyes stabbed straight into my heart like twin blades. Not out of blame, but because she saw me for who I was, the stranger who hadn't bought her out of lust or pity, but because of a debt no one else knew about. As we walked the red dirt trail out of town, I could feel the whispers of the crowd behind us slicing into my back like dull knives. "That bitch is gonna slit your throat in your sleep, fool. Serves you right. Wait till she skins you alive." I tightened the reins. Ainara walked beside me, her bare feet bloodied from the sharp stones. I tried to help her, but she pulled away proud, as if she were still the princess of some lost tribe. We stopped near an abandoned well. I pulled out my last canteen and held it out to her. She didn't take it. She just looked at me and said, "I don't want water from a man who buys human beings." I didn't get angry. She had every right to hate the world, but I needed to tell her the truth. "You don't understand. 5 years ago, your father pulled me out of the desert. I was wounded, dying, left for dead like a stray dog. He didn't ask who I was. He didn't need a reason. And he's the only man who's ever done that for me." For the first time, Ainara's gaze wavered. Her hand trembled. Then she took the canteen. "My father's name was Tahu. He's dead. They killed him when he refused to hand over his land and his daughters. They burned our village to the ground." I sat down in the dust, stunned. Dreams, now ashes, floated in the hot air. Ainara kept talking, her voice dry as desert wind. "They captured my 2 sisters and me. I was the only one who escaped, only to be caught again and sent to another slave outpost. I don't know where they took my sisters, but I remember the leader's face. He had a crescent-shaped scar on his left wrist. In that moment, I wasn't just repaying a life. I had become a living witness to a broken system, one where human beings were sold like cattle. And right in front of me was the last survivor of a family who had once saved mine. I stood up. A fire from deep inside me screamed out, "No one deserves to live in shame just because they were born in the wrong place under the wrong sky. No one." "You know where they're keeping people?" Ainara nodded. "I heard them talk about a place they call the Dry Ravine, a deep cliff where they hold everything they're getting ready to sell. A place like that couldn't be far, but it wasn't somewhere you wandered into without a plan. And me, I had a rifle, a horse, and a rage boiling just beneath the surface. On the way there, Ainara led me through paths only her people would know. She read every track, every scrap of cloth snagged on a branch, every ember still warm. I started to understand she wasn't a victim. She was a fighter, a young woman who had lost everything but still stood tall for one reason alone: to find her family. We stopped at the edge of a rocky overlook, staring down into a wide valley. Below the traffickers' camp, 3 wagons, campfires, shadows. And in the middle, 2 young girls tied to a post. Ainara grabbed my hand. She didn't cry, she just whispered, "That's Lyri and Micah, my sisters." I took a deep breath, my fingers tightening around the rifle's grip. Not from fear, but because I knew one thing. We'd only get one shot. And if we failed, there'd be no one left alive to tell the story. Well, if this story lit a fire in your heart the way it did in mine while writing it, drop a 1 in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with anyone who still believes in justice. And if you don't believe in miracles born of gratitude and courage, just hit like, because what comes next will leave you breathless. Dawn didn't come with a rooster's crow. It arrived with a freezing gust, sweeping through the canyon, carrying the dark breath of blood ready to spill. Ainara was sitting at the edge of the cliff, eyes locked on 2 figures tied up below. Her hands were clenched so tightly the blood had stopped flowing. And I knew if I didn't step in, she'd go down there alone and either kill every last one of them or die trying. I knelt beside her. "We need a plan. This isn't about emotion, it's a mission." Ainara turned her head toward me, her black eyes glowing with that fierce light you only see in people who've lost everything, except their fire. Then tell me, how many can we kill quietly before the others wake up? She wasn't joking. We began prepping for the assault. One rifle, one hunting knife, and one shot at doing it right. I handed her the last bullets and slid the knife into her belt. She didn't flinch. She was a real fighter, not trained but forged in hatred, loss, and the kind of love for her sisters that never once left her heart. When the sun began to rise, the traffickers were still passed out, drunk on wine and drunk on their own belief that no one would ever stand up to them. They were wrong. We crept down a narrow path, one step at a time, silent as breath. When we got close, I signaled her to stop. She nodded. I crawled through the dirt, holding my breath, inching through low rocks until I reached the back of a wagon. The only guard was a kid, barely 20, baby-faced, but gripping a rifle like he held someone else's life in his hands. My chest tightened, but I didn't hesitate. One swift blow to the throat and he dropped without a sound. There was no room left for mercy. Ainara crawled over to her sisters. She cut the ropes and hugged them before they even realized what was happening. They were shaking, but they didn't cry. Maybe they had run out of tears long ago. I motioned to them. Go! But a bottle rolled from the hand of a man sleeping by the fire and struck a rock. The entire camp woke up, shouting, guns cocking. And then, hell broke loose. I fired the first shot, dropping the leader. Ainara pulled her sisters behind a rock, then turned, her knife flashing in the first rays of morning. She lunged at a charging man, stabbing him under the ribcage. His blood splattered across her face. She didn't even blink. She kept going like someone born to avenge. We ran uphill, shooting as we moved. Bullets zipped past us. Stones shattered at our feet. One round grazed my shoulder, burning. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I fell, Ainara and her sisters would be dragged straight back to hell. We reached the cliff. I turned and fired my last 2 rounds. One man dropped his gun, still pointed at Ainara. The other one vanished. I growled and reloaded. But Ainara saw him circling, climbing the other side. She didn't scream, didn't ask. She drew her knife and ran the other way. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. I had no choice but to follow. They met at the top. Ainara and the man who killed her father torched her village and sold her dignity. Look at me, she growled. He smirked and reached for his gun. But he never got the chance to shoot. Ainara flew at him, bringing down a lifetime's worth of pain. Her blade drove into his heart with a scream that didn't sound human anymore. When I reached her, he was already dead. She stood there gasping, covered in blood, his, and maybe some of her own. I helped her up. Ainara looked at me. My sisters are alive. But me? I've been dead for a long time. I shook my head. You're alive. And you just saved all 3 of you, like. We made our way down. The 3 sisters clung to one another like the world could fall apart any second. But it didn't matter now. They were together again. I stayed back. And for the first time in my life, I felt small. Me, who had survived gunfights and hundreds of desert nights, I would never understand the strength of a woman who's lost everything and still gets back up to pull others out of the abyss. No one said a word as we rode out of that bloody valley. Just the sound of hooves pounding the dry earth and the ragged breaths of people who had crossed the line between life and death. Ainara rode in the middle, her sisters clinging to her sides like letting go for even a second would shatter the world all over again. I brought up the rear rifle in hand, not out of fear of another attack, but because I knew the greatest danger isn't the bullets. It's what lurks in the silence of our own minds. We stopped in a narrow ravine to rest. The night was nearly over and the sun was just a red scratch on the horizon. No one spoke. But in that silence, I could hear Ainara's heart screaming. Not from fear, but because she still couldn't accept that she had won. I walked up as she pulled out her knife and sat down to sharpen it on a large stone. You don't have to do that anymore. We saved them. She didn't look at me. They're not all dead. I stayed quiet. That sentence, cold and sharp as a verdict, hit me square in the chest. Ainara didn't just want to save people. She wanted to wipe this evil out. Not for revenge, but to stop it from ever happening again. Then, like a sudden cut on an already calloused palm, she told me something she had never dared to say before. My little sister Micah wanted to learn how to read. She used to draw birds and mountains in the sand, and said one day she'd make a map to help kidnapped girls escape. They laughed. One of the men crushed her hand with a rock just for daring to dream. I looked away, fists clenched. No one has the right to crush someone else's dreams. No one. I can't forgive, Ainara said. Not because of what they did to me, but because I saw the silence of the world. All those who watched, who knew, and said nothing. They killed my father, but that silence killed his soul long before they ever touched him. Her words stole my breath. Because I understood them too well. I had been that silence. The man who walks past a corpse and says, "It's not my problem." Until the day I was the one lying in the burning sand and a stranger, Ainara's father, saved me. That's when I understood the cost of silence is innocent lives. We decided to ride again, not to end a story, but to stop new ones from starting. Ainara had overheard mercenaries talk about another slave outpost even bigger deep in the desert near the southern border, a place where the traffickers met each month to divide the merchandise. The three sisters agreed. Kiona, the quietest one, was the first to speak. If we don't go, there'll be another Ainara, another Micah, hanging in a market sold as second-hand goods. We rode day and night. The desert stretched before us like a dare. Sandstorms whipped our faces, but no one complained. Ainara was now a leader not because she wanted to be, but because no one else could carry that weight. I saw the way the nomads looked at us as we passed their camps. Some with pity, some turned away, but a few, especially women, nodded quietly as if they understood. We reached a shallow valley with fresh wagon tracks, hastily raised tents, and smoke. Ainara dropped behind a rock, scanning the area. At least 10 men, better armed. And there are children. I frowned. Children, little girls. They're getting ready for another transfer. My chest felt like it might explode. This wasn't just Ainara's family's story anymore. This was the story of hundreds, maybe thousands. Each girl down there represented unspeakable pain, ripped from a mother's arms, sold for less than a worn-out rifle. We were crouched in the brush, close enough to see, but hidden by tall weeds maybe 100 steps from the camp. The firelight lit up the silhouettes of drunken men, laughing, joking, trading lives in the heart of the desert. But in the middle of that so-called open-air market beside a rotting wagon was a scene that made my fists bleed. 3 little girls about Micah's age, tied up and still at the feet of a man, handing out their lives like war spoils. Ainara didn't say a word, but I could hear her breathing, jagged, deep, quiet, like the air before a storm. Her gaze wasn't that of a sister anymore. It was the gaze of a mother against her will. A woman who had already lost part of her flesh, now facing the ones who were about to repeat the same nightmare. I placed a hand on her shoulder to stop her. "We can't attack now, there are too many. And this time they've got real guards." She pushed my hand away. "I don't care. They're not leaving here with those children." I understood, but I also knew that if emotion took over, we'd all be dead before we even made a move. We pulled back, ducking behind a dune hidden in shadow. The group regrouped, and for the first time the 3 sisters planned together. Kiona sketched the camp layout in the dirt with a dry stick. Micah, still shaking, kept her eyes wide open. Those little girls reminded her of herself. Then suddenly, Ainara turned to me and said, "When I was held prisoner, I heard one of them talk about a special shipment they were moving through an old rail line west of the camp. If that's true, it's our only weak spot. An abandoned railroad, no one would have guessed those bastards were still using that relic as a transport hub." I nodded. "Then we don't just attack, we make them think they're being hunted." We split up. Micah and Kiona would sneak the other children out of the tents and toward a safe spot I'd found earlier, a shallow cave hidden in the slope, hard to see but just big enough to hide them. Ainara and I would strike from the back of the camp, spread chaos. When the moon was high and their drunken laughter slowed to a slur, we made our move. I fired the first shot, not to kill, but to blow out the lantern hanging near the ammo stash. A fireball shot up. Guards screamed in confusion. Ainara lit another blaze from the west, then shouted in the ancient tongue of her people, part battle cry, part curse on those who spread evil. One man ran toward us. I shot him. Another bolted towards the tents, but Ainara threw her knife. It hit him square in the throat. They didn't even get a chance to figure out who was attacking. No faces, no army, just sand shadow and screams. We didn't fight like soldiers, we fought like ghosts of the dead who had never been heard. And every time one of them fell, I remembered what Ainara had told me: little girls sold like animals, her mother hanged in front of the whole village, as an example for others who might speak too loudly. When we reached the supply depot, we made another discovery, a ledger stained with blood but still legible. Inside was a list of goods shipped over the past 3 months, names, ages, weights, destinations. Ainara grabbed it, her hands shaking. They turned human suffering into numbers, into inventory. I nodded slowly. We have to get this book into the right hands. And after that, no one will be able to deny what happened. That night, after evacuating all the children, we burned the entire camp. Every tent, every crate, every scrap of fabric, nothing could be left standing. Ainara threw the last ledger into the fire, but I stopped her. No. That one. I'm keeping. On the way back, Micah asked me, Uncle Wes, aren't you afraid of dying? I looked at Ainara, then up at the ink-black sky. There are worse things than dying, like knowing the truth and doing nothing about it. We thought it was over after that night after the fire. But just a few hours later, while we were resting in a cave near the edge of the desert, a massive explosion thundered from the west near the old rail line Ainara had mentioned. I rushed outside, binoculars pressed to my eyes. Thick black smoke rose from the tracks. Ainara stood next to me, the wind whipping her hair, her eyes wide. They're back. Or, there's another outpost we didn't know about. I nodded. A chill ran down my spine. Something felt off, deeply wrong. While we had been focused on rescuing kids from the first camp, a much larger force had regrouped and expanded operations toward the border. This wasn't just a gang of traffickers hiding in the dark anymore. It was an organized network, protected, equipped, armed. With Ainara, we led the group to a high ridge where we could see the dry plain clearly, and there in the middle of the cracked earth a rusted train was being repaired. But what froze my blood was a red flag waving high, stamped with a black crescent moon. Ainara recognized it instantly. It's the Sable, a splinter faction that spread terror across the border for 10 years. And now they're back, with an even worse business, trafficking women for forced reproduction. I didn't have time to ask more. In the distance, a line of people bound in pairs, heads down, was being pushed toward the train cars. Oufos! My face burned. My jaw clenched with fury. I couldn't believe it. After everything we'd done, hell still wasn't over. This time it wasn't just Ainara who was angry. Kiona, Micah, me. We all knew if we walked away now, everything we'd done before would mean nothing. Ainara looked at me, her lips tight. We can't get them all out. But if we blow the locomotive, if we cut the tracks, they won't be able to leave the desert. And if word spreads, the world will know. I asked her, Are you sure you want to do this? This time, there may be no way back. She glanced at the prisoners, then answered with steel in her voice. I don't need a way back. I need justice. Planning an assault in the desert with 3 exhausted girls and a group of barely saved survivors wasn't some heroic mission. It was a desperate gamble by people with nothing left to lose except their faith. We divided the tasks. I'd provide sniper cover from the cliff. Ainara and Kiona would sneak in through the southern ravine with explosives we'd salvaged from the old camp. And Micah, the girl whose hand had once been crushed for daring to dream, redrew the layout of the rail depot, defenses, entry points, escape routes, with the same hand that had once bled for hope. When the last rays of sunlight touched the locomotive, we made our move. I fired first, dropping a sentry, and threw smoke grenades to cover the breach. Ainara and Kiona slipped into the shadows, planning charges beneath the axles of the train just as the departure siren screamed. Guards poured out, double what we expected. I was pushed back, firing until my last round. One lunged at me. I dropped him with the butt of my rifle, but I hit the ground too. Below, Ainara had already triggered the explosives. The train went up in flames, wheels shattered, the entire platform tore apart like a crushed heart. Screams echoed across the valley. The prisoners revolted in the chaos. Some fled, others didn't make it. But what mattered was this: the death train wouldn't leave. And for the first time, the world would be forced to look. Ainara had been shot in the shoulder, her leather jacket soaked in blood. But she stood tall and shouted at the surviving guards, "You will sell pain no longer. From today on, every child is aflame, and we will burn you to ash." I pulled her behind a rock wall. My body was bruised and bleeding, but my heart had never felt lighter, because I knew this wasn't the end. But we had just broken the biggest link in hell's chain. The next morning didn't bring light, only smoke. Smoke from the burned-out train in the heart of the desert. Smoke from the fire now burning inside every soul who had just escaped the devil's grip. We had no time to celebrate. Ainara was lying on the sand, flat on her back, her shoulder wound, still bleeding, eyes closed. Micah knelt beside her, her tiny hands shielding the injury from the wind, while Kiona used the last strip of cloth to dress it. I stood guard weapon ready, eyes locked on the horizon, because I knew the real fight hadn't even begun. News of the explosion spread faster than the wind. The surviving mercenaries had run straight to the man behind it all. A man we'd never seen but everyone knew as the Black Judge. A man without a courtroom but at the head of an empire built on abduction, trafficking, and murder, as if he were running a legal industry. We had to move fast, but just as we were about to pull out, one of the rescued girls came out from behind a burned wagon. In her arms, wrapped in cloth, was a folder sealed with red wax hidden under the wagon's floorboards. Ainara opened it. Inside was a list of names: politicians, merchants, military officers, all complicit in the human trafficking ring. Even the name of the former sheriff from the town I had passed through. This wasn't just trafficking. This was a hidden empire. Ainara looked at me. "We can't just kill. We have to bring light where everything's rotten." I nodded. "But who do we give this to? Who will believe it? Who will speak up?" Micah answered softly but with fire in her voice. "Then we speak up ourselves." In that moment, I understood we were no longer just wanderers saving souls before vanishing into the dust. We had become witnesses, bearers of evidence strong enough to bring down an entire network built on the world's indifference. We made our decision to return to the land of Ainara's people, the place where fire had destroyed everything, where villages had been wiped from maps, and where pain had turned into legend. If any survivors remained, they would understand. If not, that land would become the grave of our final fury. A few days later, as we crossed a rocky pass, an unexpected sight appeared. People. Survivors, not many, but they were there. Rebuilding clay rooftops, rekindling fires, teaching children how to set traps, planting medicinal herbs in the shade of dead trees. When Ainara dismounted, the whole camp froze. An old woman stepped forward slowly. Her eyes no longer cried, probably because they had shed all the tears they could, but her hands trembled as they touched Ainara's cheek. "You're alive." Ainara nodded. "Not just alive. I carry the truth." I handed the folder to the old woman. Kiona read each name aloud. Then something unexpected: one of the men in the village, once a low-ranking enforcer in the Sable group who had returned to farming, was recognized. When questioned, he lowered his head and confessed. Ainara didn't kill him. She demanded that he lead us to the last known location of the Black Judge. We left. This time with no attempts to hide, no stealth, no sand to cover our tracks. We walked like survivors, carrying hundreds of voices the world had never heard. When we reached the stone villa perched on a wind-swept plateau, Ainara didn't wait for me to act. She threw the folder into the guard's face and shouted, "Give this to your master. If he wants silence, I'll scream louder. If he denies it, I'll show the whole damn world." No one answered, but I saw the guard's hand shake as he took the folder. He didn't stop us from walking forward. He knew the fire had already reached his master's doorstep. That night we returned to the village. Whoosh. No one slept. They listened to Ainara not with tears but with truth. She didn't need to shout because truth doesn't need to yell. It just needs someone brave enough to show it. This story is a powerful reminder. Silence in the face of injustice is a form of complicity. The most vulnerable don't need heroes, they need people who will stand beside them when the world turns away. Through Ainara's journey and that of the survivors, we learn that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the act of moving forward despite it. That justice doesn't always come from courtrooms, but from defiant hearts. Every one of us can be a spark, and if we can't light up the whole world, then at the very least, let's light the path for the one walking next to us.